Good afternoon. I hope you can hear me. I have hit the record button. We are going to be recording CPDs. If you could just let me know that you can see and hear me, that would be lovely before I carry on talking to you. Right, so just to check, I've got Holly from Q3. Um, Unfortunately, for some reason, I don't have the names of everybody, so we'll probably do a bit of a brief introduction in a moment. Okay, so it is 4 o'clock. Can someone just let me know if you can hear me, please? Because I've had some problems earlier with my sound. That's great, thank you. Right. Oh, brilliant. So, thank you very much. That's very kind of you. So, I think the people will be sort of joining us. I've just started about 4 o'clock. I have hit record. I just want to introduce myself and introduce this afternoon for you. So my name is Heather Hughes. I am Trust Lead Professional for Humanities across the MAT. I'm also Faculty Lead for Humanities at Aldridge School. I have been a Subject Leader of History, and as I say, now I'm Faculty Lead for Humanities. At Aldridge, that means History, Geography, RST and Citizenship. But my Mercian role is looking at supporting the teaching of geography and history. There are going to be a number of you joining, which is brilliant, but also slightly scary because this is my first CPD that I've done. So I welcome you all, and I'm aware that you've given up time after school, so I do appreciate that. As I say, I've just had a couple of technical glitches because I'm actually working from home today. So if I cut out, please bear with me. I am, for those people that just joined, recording. I'm going to talk through a PowerPoint. I promise I won't repeat all of it. But I'd like to just share the screen with that PowerPoint and just make a start and start to explain hopefully how this will be of use to you. Okay, so it's just hopefully we can all see the PowerPoint slide. Sharing is something I'm still getting used to on the screen. So I'm hoping again that we can all see that. Please let me know if you can't. If you want to just unmute for a minute, anybody who can't see the screen. If it's nice and quiet, I will assume that we can all see it. Okay, so first off, what I'm trying to do is bring together some of the reading that I've done, but also bring through an experience that Aldridge went through in May of this year when we did have Ofsted come and visit us. What I am just going to write people. And we'll just share that my window again. Okay, and I think we can all see that, which is great. So yes, so what I want to do is talk through partly about the visit that we received, partly about some of the information that came through from history and geography's reports from Ofsted, and hopefully just to help you have a think about that sort of key question: what have we learnt from Ofsted that can help us with a better curriculum in humanities? I want to start by just taking a section from our OFSTED report. And the first thing I am very keen for you to understand is this is not me crowing. This I wanted to start with, so to sort of explain to you why we got some of these comments, and also where we've got to carry on working, because obviously as teachers we are never happy. But can I please reiterate, this is not a crowing, this is not a bragging, but I want you to understand what we got, but how we got there, how we've learned from this experience. We spent an awful lot of time over the last few years, really, obviously being hit by COVID in between, looking at curriculum and looking at the new framework that Ofsted came up with, and really using it as a chance to develop, I think, a better curriculum across humanities, and certainly opening up and unlocking a whole set of conversations about curriculum that perhaps we hadn't really had before, or if we had, we hadn't had them in the depth that we did. You'll notice it talks about knowledge and skills and understanding, building on prior learning, dealing with pupils that struggle, and things that we are still yet to do, and that is to ensure that pupils can remember more, which is obviously something that both teachers of geography, teachers of history, teachers of all subjects, it is the holy grail, making sure our students can remember. Before we go any further, I wanted to share, with you. I'm not very good with sharing, as you can tell. I wanted to share with you the actual process of the day. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about the process of the day when Ofsted visited us in May. And then I want to talk to you, almost sort of go back in time, a little bit like if any of you've seen Pulp Fiction. I want to go back and talk about how we got to that point, okay? And hopefully then that'll make more sense. And then at the end, I'll open it up to questions if that's okay. So the day before we get the phone call, and geography, one of the areas that I work with, were told that they were going to be seen the following day. So Emma, my geography subject lead, got told by me, it's brilliant, you're going to show how amazing you are, you're going to show your staff are going to be brilliant, it's going to be wonderful. Obviously that's not what Emma perhaps was feeling at the time. The following day, Emma, as subject lead, met alone with the inspector and took into her meeting her laptop and her folder. The laptop really was the key, because that's how Emma works. So schemes of work were on there, the staff shared area has all our PowerPoints on there, and she took that into that meeting. And we'll talk about what was discussed at the meeting in a few moments' time. Following that were learning walks. The subject lead, so Emma, the inspector, and the Humanities SLT link were taking part in those learning walks. And the idea obviously was that what Emma had been talking about and illustrating and saying was practice in geography was actually being seen. It was then followed with a student focus, students' books were being scrutinised. And again, I'll sort of talk about what was being looked at. And again, the other thing that we were quite happy about was the questions being asked and the exercises happening with those books was not a surprise. And then finally, the teachers who had been earlier learn walked were put into a meeting with the inspector. Emma, the subject lead, was not present. So it's very much a chance for the staff to talk about the lessons. So that was the process. I'm sure it's no surprise to any of you. It certainly wasn't a surprise to us, partly because of internal deep dives we've tried, partly because of the training that we've done, and partly because of the sort of the build-up of experience that we've had over the last few years. Okay, so sort of wrapped in within this PowerPoint, and I will share the PowerPoint with you. I'll get it sent across to you. I'm going to refer to two men. I'm going to attempt to sort of deal with the fact I've got geographists and historians with me. Tim Jenner is Ofsted's National Lead for History. Ian Freeland is the Ofsted National Lead for Geography. And last year they both put out their reports on the teaching of the subjects across the country, at primary and also at secondary. And I've tried to draw in some of those things into this afternoon. At the bottom are the links to where I got the information from. What I did want to just briefly mention is the sections that I put in bold, because you can see there that both history and geographists, one of the key things that both Freeland and Jenner found was the idea of repeated encounters, going back through key points. The idea is mentioned by Jenner in point 4. It's mentioned by Freeland further down in point 8. It talks this about that they regularly practice, that there's repeated encounters. And certainly, I think one of the things that would help, perhaps, if you know, when you're talking about curriculum with an external point of view, or when you're looking at curriculum from the point of view of, you know, how does Ofsted help us to perhaps improve and to get better and to think about our curriculum, that is one of the things that both national leads have talked about and have said that it is good practice and they have seen it in classrooms. The remembering, this idea of committing to memory, and long-term memory, and recalling it and repeating it. I know a lot of us are doing a lot of retrieval work, either as starting activities, as low stakes. That's certainly something that we've been doing in our geography and history lessons. It was certainly something that you would have seen if you'd have been with the Ofsted inspector walking into geography in May. And it's something that both national leads have talked about. And it's this bit really. Now, let me explain to you. We at Aldridge had been thinking about Ofsted for quite a while, as we all do. And our SRT team had done a lot of CPD after school, talking with us about questions, and had shared with us a whole set of questions under different headings. And the process basically was this idea of looking at key areas, having questions that would make you think, make you perhaps start to try and work on, try and improve, but also questions that you could well get asked when you are inspected. And initially it was shared with faculty leaders. Then it was rolled out, these questions, to subject leaders, who then discussed them with people like me, and sort of we clarify points and, you know, what you should be thinking about. And then it was rolled out to classroom staff. So there was a very much a sort of not a hierarchy in a bad way, but let's clarify key points. So I clarified key points when I first got these questions. Then I worked with my subject leads. Then the subject leads started talking to their teachers. And again, I know that I'm using the geography team from my school, but I think this little story sort of helps you understand the practicalities. So I obviously worked with Emma on these questions, and we talked about what might go into the answers. Obviously, I worked with my other humanity leads as well. And then they all had independent departmental meetings. And within those meetings, they shared these questions again, and their staff sort of basically threw answers at them. And I happened to be sat in the geography meeting. So Emma's asking these questions, her staff are going, oh yeah, what about this? What about this? What about this? She's jotting down ideas. A lot of it's about evidencing. And I think if and when you are thinking about, you know, how we can make ourselves better, these conversations should be had quite regularly as time allows you. I mean, there's always the amazing gain time that we always sort of smile and think, yes, we can do lots of things, but actually it's a good time of the year to be having these sorts of questions. And because of that process, because staff got to share their ideas with their subject lead, with each other, not only does it get them to help understand the process of when they are going to be asked questions, perhaps by Ofsted, but it makes them really go back through their curriculum again and have a really deep set of thoughts about it. And it also gives you and your staff ownership, shared ownership of your curriculum. And that's important. Everyone needs to be able to understand it. Everyone needs to be able to talk about it. And I wouldn't just argue because of Ofsted, but also because it belongs to you. And it's really important that you understand the purpose of it. And the sorts of questions you can see there, and the sorts of questions Emma was actually asked when Ofsted came in and talked to her as one of the deep dives, were things like, well, where's your challenge? Okay, where could you see it? Where have you got it indicated? Where is it flagged? Why do you consider that to be a challenge? And these are all brilliant questions. They're not like, oh, which topics are we going to teach? It's right, well, why? Yeah, that's the crux of everything, is that word why. One of the other things about curriculum, and I know it's a word that's used an awful lot over the last couple of years, is sequencing. Why are we teaching it in this order? Why are we teaching this now? What is the point of teaching this at this particular point of the school year? Is it appropriate? Why is it appropriate? How does it build up to? And it's these sorts of discussions that my teams had. And it's these sorts of discussions that Ofsted were asking when they came in, not just of Emma, but of that final meeting when they talked to the teachers that they'd actually seen within the classroom. And as I say, these questions, they didn't come from me, they came from my SLT, but they were very useful. They were very good at making us perhaps think in a way we haven't thought about curriculum, I will admit, for some time. And the other point was that by sharing these questions, we could all have the same answers. And again, that's really, really important. That's one thing we've definitely learned from, and I know that's a generic point for all subjects, but you really need to be all saying the same sort of things because you're teaching the same curriculum. And I think that's really quite important. I'm not going to read all these to you, I promise. I will send this out to you later. The left-hand side of your screen, you've got what Tim Jenner's report referenced when it came to curriculum, and on the right-hand side, you've got Ian Freeland's points from geography. And so I've sort of tried to weave those in. So you've got me talking about some of the experiences that we've had, but you've also got what Ofsted's two lead subject leads have got to say as well. And as I say, I am not going to read that to you. You can have a look at that in your own time. But it does definitely tally with what we've been thinking about when we've looked at our curriculums and how we're working together and how we're monitoring our students and why we teach things in a certain way and so forth. Again, more questions that we got asked by our SLT. And again, I think assessment and curriculum, I don't know your thoughts, but they certainly sort of weave together very much. And it's, I think the first one, it's this idea about how can you articulate your assessments of good quality. One thing that I would also perhaps add to that is if you are a subject leader, or if you are someone that's responsible for perhaps a section of a scheme of work and you have assessments within there, you know, think about the distribution of grades as well. I think that's something else that helps you to see whether the quality is there. And if you have got that spread of marks. And also think about another point that Ofsted made us think about, not necessarily on the day, but I think the other point you need to think about is how are you going to approach assessing everybody? Are you going to have the same assessment for everybody? And if so, how are you going to structure that to allow it access? Are you going to set different assessments? I'm not going to say we got the answer for that one. I certainly know that there's arguments and there's pros and cons for both. For geography, we looked at it and it was decided that there would be different assessments to allow our weakest of children to access marks or grades, but also that those were, as time went on, made harder and more difficult to allow those children to progress. So it wasn't that they were dumbed down and really you didn't see any rigour there at all. Lots of one of the things we've learned, and I feel like I'm teaching grandmother to suck eggs, but I think the other thing is as well that, you know, the low stakes testing at the start of our lessons was mentioned that allows our retrieval, thinking very carefully about the questions that you use in those low stakes. Are they part of a set of questions throughout that scheme of work? Are they leading to an exam practice question that's going to be slid into part of your scheme of work before perhaps a final assessment, a summative assessment? And also being able to have a think about what am I doing with those results? How am I spotting the gaps? How am I closing those gaps? And of course, as well, when we're talking about closing gaps, COVID wasn't directly mentioned, but it is still there, and we were ready to discuss how we try to deal with the gaps that have appeared because of the COVID and lockdowns. And having an answer to number 5, Emma went in knowing that she could talk about how her assessments led to curriculum development. And one of the ways that we do it is that there is a old-fashioned paper copy in each of their offices, because each of my teams has got an office because we don't have an overall staff room. And staff put post-it notes and scribble over schemes of work or schemes of learning. And those are all taken into account during gain time when our schemes of work are revised, reviewed, amended, updated, or ultimately changed. And again, that was something that she was very clear with the inspector, and she talked about how we have learned that we forget. So we are constantly making notes. Some of us do it electronically, some of us do it on paper, and we are constantly having those chats about we can make this better, this doesn't quite work, we need to update that. And that it was a working document, and management speak, it is definitely an organic document, and that's good. And it's good to be able to talk about, I'm not happy with that. And we did have those conversations, and it's nothing to be scared of to say, we're not quite sure about that, we're not quite happy about that. But we know what we're doing. It's all about knowing what you're going to do differently. Again, if you would like to read that in your own time, but that's what Jenna and Friedland had to say. And SEND. I know for us, it's an area we will never be happy with, in that we want to be better and better at teaching our SEND children. Aldridge has got quite a large number of children with SEND coming in to our schools, EHCPs, etc. And therefore we've got to get better, because those children are going through our school, and they deserve accessible yet rigorous and challenging work. And one of the things that we learned from was, and I mentioned this, is we prepped very carefully. We knew that we were going to be OFSTEDed, but also we knew that we could be better. And one of the things that we'd done in advance, in fact, before COVID, was that geography and Emma asked, can we have a form of a deep dive, an internal version, and can SEND be my focus? I really want people to look at it, to question me. And so we did. And we looked at learning walks. We talked to a range of our SEND students. We looked at a range of books to look at all the different forms of SEND, and I think that's quite important. And we brought in our SENCO to give us her expert opinion. And we looked at the level of difficulty of the materials that they're trying to read and the diagrams that they're trying to use, and the questions. And we found that the questions were fine, but the materials themselves had not been adapted. And therefore, Emma could then start to look at how can I adapt these materials, and her team started to look at how can we adapt our materials. And actually, SEND was not an issue in our Ofsted because she'd already done that. And I think that's one of the things we've learned in our preparation, is don't be scared of doing internal deep dives. And if you don't like deep dive, it's not the best of terms. I'm aware of that, call it what you want, a QA. But I think that's one of the things that we benefited from and we learned from. And I would recommend that. And I'd recommend people outside of your team, if you know there's someone who's particularly good at SEND, it might be your Senko, it might be someone in your English team, it might be the SRT link. But I would really, I'd really say go for it and get people looking at it. Look at your scaffolding. Is it too heavy? Is it not enough? Is it SEND specific, or is it scaffolding you just give a general low ability group? It's all these questions that we were asking before we were visited, and therefore, the quality of the curriculum was already starting to improve. TAs are really quite important, obviously. They are an amazing asset. And I would very much have a think about how you communicate with TAs. And if within your department you're happy with how you communicate with TAs, time is always a problem because they're always rushing off. And it might be that it has to be partly through email or partly through OneNote or whatever formats you use in your schools. But certainly it is something that is really important. You've got an additional member of staff in there, think about how do I communicate with that TA? How do I ensure they're working effectively? Do we divide the class up if it's a small group? How would I talk to somebody else about how I use the TA? And would the TA say the same thing as myself and as my staff? And it's this idea of sort of a common voice, a common set of ideas. I think that was definitely, we didn't have a class with a TA in, but we could have done. And again, I think Emma would have gone in feeling, reasonably comfortable as you can be in an Ofsted. Again, if you want to have a read of those, that's from Jenna and Freeland. CPD, now this comes from Ian Freeland, but it is something for you to think about. Now, I am talking specifically to history and geographists, but I'm sure all the subjects have this issue too, and that is non-specialists in your department. Are you in a position, to feel comfortable? One, that they could be viewed, but two, that they are comfortable and they are happy and they understand, and they are part of those earlier conversations I talked about when subject leaders are talking about curriculum. For the most part, they are well supported. The geography report from last year said. However, we have got an increasing number, particularly in some deprived schools where perhaps recruitment isn't as easy. You tend to find that even, the GCSE hours are being taught by non-specialists. Have a think about your support for those people. Have a think about how do you do it? Do you just leave them and expect them to get in touch? How do they access your meetings if they're probably going to another meeting for their main subject? And do they have the same message? Are they on point like your specialist team? And how do you think you could go about drawing them in, making sure they perhaps have those key points? It's not easy. We're all very busy. They could be in another part of the school. They might even teach in their regular classroom, so you don't get to see them. But you need, one of the points that I think that Ofsted's made us think about is, well, how do we approach that? We have had non-specialists. We did last year, teaching at Key Stage 3. They weren't seeing, but they did understand the curriculum because we'd gone through it, but because it was a whole school thing as well, they understood the importance of knowing the key points, of knowing the rationale, of knowing and understanding the sequence of lessons, etc., for all the subjects that they teach in. Pupil premium or disadvantaged students. We did not get asked about that. I don't, again, your thoughts on this one, but I know my thought is if we teach all children well, they all improve. The gap is there because of COVID. We weren't asked about it ourselves, but it is something that we need to think about. It can be partly through how you offer additional support. It can be how you perhaps can fund certain points. It can be online activities. It can be a range of things. It's not necessarily you mark their book first, as we were once told. There's a lot more to it. And I think at the crux of it is just we teach them really well, and we are aware of their difficulties. But I haven't got all the answers. I know I'm running this training tonight, but I think that is an area that, like other areas, that we can certainly perhaps do better at. The QA, those again, these are the questions that our SLT asked of us. And it is part of making humanities better. And it is a part of understanding that we're accountable. And it's actually getting into the system. If you're a subject lead, or if you're responsible for part of a curriculum scheme of work, you know, get people looking at it, get people asking questions. Be aware of where your strengths are and why they are. Give examples of the action points that you're moving on to do. Be able to talk about how those action points actually have seen an improvement. If you do have improvement plans, either individually or that your departmental sort of, paperwork and rationales feed into that, that's another area that I know that my staff were fully aware of the school priorities, etc. I just wanted to share this. It's a bit cheesy, I'm well aware of it. I'm sure that you are confident if you're a subject leader. I am sure that you would be prepared. The one thing I would say with be prepared, you know, take in your big folder, take in your laptop, take in, you know, whatever it is that you want and that will make you secure. I would say one thing that we have learned is we do not open the Pandora's box of talking about data. Ofsted aren't interested. I don't really want to start talking about data if I don't need to, not necessarily because it's bad, but because it opens up all sorts of rabbit warrens and holes. And that's certainly something that I don't want. I want my subject leaders to be talking, and I would want to be talking as a subject leader about my subject, my curriculum, and definitely try and get across what you're particularly proud of. You know, make a list of things that you want to tell them. Emma certainly went in there knowing what she wanted to tell them, and got to do that. But the big thing that we've learned, and again, this is a generic point, is please make sure that either if you're part of a team, that you're aware of what your subject leader would be saying in that initial meeting, or if you are leading a team, that you make sure that your team have got the same message, that are going to be talking in a very similar way. I just want to stop sharing. And I think that's the key point. I'm rattling through and I'm aware of that. But I would say that the key takeaways from what we've learned as a humanities team, yes, they're partly generic takeaways. And one is that everything that was said by a subject lead, in this case, it was Emma, and in other cases, you know, who knows, it might be. But I think the key thing is that initial meeting where you are waxing lyrical about how brilliant your curriculum is, how amazing your your sequencing is, how you put this new really brilliant unit in, and you've got engagement and all those things that you will be hammering home if you're allowed to by your inspector, is seen in the lesson, is seen in the child's books. And those child's books as well need to show that it is accessible to all. So, you know, if we open books, are we going to see the same lesson on glaciers? Or if it's history, the same lesson on the dissolution of the monasteries and Henry VIII? Or am I going to see differences because I've got a top set book where a child might be aiming for, or being, without knowing, is being pushed towards a certain grade, and I've got a special needs child, or I've got a low ability, or I've got a middle ability? Am I going to see the same things? Am I going to see it's taught in the same way? If the subject lead is talking about accessibility, then those books should be different. The pitch and the pace will be different. The topics will be the same. I would imagine, unless you've chosen to do it in a slightly different way, perhaps for specific learning needs. So everything, it's this triangulation. I was talking to my line manager this morning about it, and she said it's all about triangulation. It was on the old OFSTED. It is internally, when we're looking at things as an SRT, as a subject lead, you want to see those things sort of correlating. Everything that's being said is mirrored. It's mirrored in the lessons, in the books, in the discussions with the staff, in the discussions with the students. And if you can get that synergy, if you can get that, then, you know, you're onto a good thing. But forget Ofsted, you're onto a good thing anyway, because everyone is moving in the same direction. Everyone, but more importantly, perhaps everyone understands why. Why are we doing these things this way? And, you know, and if we can get the students to understand the curriculum as well, you know, I'm learning this at the moment because I'm doing this because, you know, understanding the process, not just saying, oh, I like doing Elizabeth I, it's really interesting, but understanding why you're teaching it at that point, why they're learning about those things. And that will come from your staff, and the staff will have come from you if you're a subject lead. I'm just checking my notes because I witter, and I apologise. But it is that shared ownership of subject lead, classroom teacher, student, and then it's seeing. And I think the things that we've learned are probably common sense anyway, but certainly being proud of your curriculum, understanding your curriculum, and making sure everybody understands it, everybody can talk about it, everybody can be excited by it, and explain, you know, why. One practical thing that I would suggest, get those questions being talked about in your departments. They open up brilliant conversations. But I think the other thing is summarise your answers down to one document. Your staff can all have that document. I know that some of my staff got it on their walls. They got it in their planners. And they almost revised it the night before. So not because they didn't know it, but because with everything else going on, you get nervous and you might forget. So I would have a summary sheet of what we're doing, why we're doing it in this way, what are our strengths, what do I want to be talking about. You can call it a script, you could say we're playing a game, but actually it's you and your staff sharing what you're really good at, and to somebody who's coming in completely objectively. And that summary allows everyone to understand, and that summary can obviously be changed because curriculum's changed, because we're always tweaking, but there's always that document somewhere that pulls everything together. I'm going to stop now. I know it's 22, but I wonder if anyone's got any questions or any experiences themselves they'd like to share with us, or if you disagree with anything. So I'm gonna open it up. You can put your hands up, but you can open your mics. I'm sure that we can cope with that. And at this point, no one says anything, and I sit here quite pained. Does anyone like to have any comments or questions or anything like that, please? Anybody? Is there anybody who actually has gone through this process of asking questions. I presume that you would, but I don't know. Has anyone got any other questions or things that they've done that they would consider good practice? Hearty silence. I know that one of our schools is having a visit this week. I know that it is very nervous. The one other thing that I would say as a takeaway is that the preparation will very much allow you to, if possible, feel calm. It's a very strange situation, but there was a great sense of calm. I think partly because we'd done practices, partly because there was a shared set of words, of ideas. It felt very calm, and that wasn't because the students were necessarily amazing at Aldridge. It was nothing like that at all. It was that the staff had, one, understood the process. They knew what was going to happen. We talked about it in advance. They knew their curriculum inside out. They'd had these conversations. They could talk about where things were going to be improved upon. And so it felt a very as calm a process as possible. Anybody like to say anything? Yes, Emma.
Just chipping in there, I say that I know you are having sort of the stony silence there. Really, it was just thinking, obviously we had our OFSTED last year, start of this year.
Yes.
Well, last year it was, I'm sort of thinking academic years versus normal years. But yeah, it was just really to say that I thought sort of those slides and what you talked through sounded really good. We were fortunate we weren't deep dived in geography, but my colleagues were in history, and certainly so just echoing what you said, that actually everything sounded very, very consistent. Certainly our colleagues in history sort of talked about their experiences, and that certainly was very similar, and we've had sort of similar training here in terms of practice questions. We've had to submit sort of answers to SLT before now, sort of typed up in terms of what would we say to some of those questions, etc. And really it was just to echo really that you know, certainly the experience here appeared to be very, very similar. And you know, just I suppose a bit of reassurance for other people that it sounds like they're being very, very consistent across the board in terms of the sorts of questions that they're asking.
Thank you. Holly.
Hi there. Yeah, so I was just wondering, did they mention much about kind of field work in geography when the inspection was happening? Strangely
enough, no.
Oh, okay.
But here lies the other thing, which we've all got to be aware of, is that it very much depends who you get. She wasn't a specialist. We didn't have a geographist visit. She was very interested in the topics. Now, I don't know if that's because she was a non-specialist, so she felt she could talk about the topics a little bit more, or she wanted to know more. It was certainly something that Emma was ready to discuss it verbatim, because I know as geography teachers that field trips are really quite important. And obviously field trips, etc., you know, have been really hurt because of COVID. She was certainly ready to talk about, and Emma was actually a little step further. She was ready to talk about learning outside of the classroom as well. So how we use school, because depending on the school you're at, it's not always easy to organise trips, because it might be the finances for some of your students, or it's just a pig to organise, and you just think, oh, I can do it very close. So I know Emma certainly did do trips, and she could have talked about trips, because in July year 7s go to the Botanical Gardens on a geography trip, and she takes the entire year group over 2 or 3 days. She takes some of the kids into Warsaw for part of their GCSEs. There's various stuff going on outside, because we've got a decent, you know, site size-wise. But I would definitely have that conversation. And I think the other thing that you need to perhaps think about as well, because of the way the conversations were going, was that this idea of how does it fit with your curriculum? Why are you doing the trip? What's led up to it? And I think one of the things, and I will say this hand on heart, as a subject lead in the past, I run some beautiful trips. Did they really link in afterwards to my curriculum? No, I've done the Industrial Revolution. I'm going to take them to Black Country Museum. Why? Because it's a really good museum and I want them to see it. And it's all about schema and they'll understand it. Did I really, years ago, did I really pull that into a curriculum? Could I have talked passionately about how that informed their learning? No, I couldn't. Could Emma have done it in my days? Yes, she could. She got her stock answers. So it's like any other topic on those lists, on those bullet points. Definitely have your rationale. How does it feed in? How does it feed into your assessment? Why have you chosen those children? Is it for everybody? And if it, if they don't all go, or is anyone at a disadvantage? So I think it's definitely a good point, but we just didn't happen to get that question.
Okay, no, thank you.
I've got a question about practical examples of SEND practice. I will look into that, yes, and I will try and get some stuff out to you. I can't promise that it will come out immediately. We are at Aldridge going into digital transformation next week, which means that the transformation basically is I lose my laptop for a week and we're using dongles and all sorts of nonsense. So it might be the week after. I'm really sorry, but I will get some stuff to you. And I think the other thing would be, which would be really lovely, is if anyone has got anything they'd like to share that they're proud of SEND-wise, if you want to send it in to me, to my email, or pop it onto Teams. We should be up and running the week after next. But it's a bit nutty next week, I'm afraid. But certainly we would like to look at sort of SEND practice. And I know it's still an area that perhaps we even fear when Ofsted come. I don't think we're there yet with my teams. I'm not being rude. They would say the same thing. We were asked about it. Emma did, talk about what she'd done. But I think the other thing was she talked about, but I'm not there yet and I need to do more and I'm going to be looking at these. Scaffolding was definitely something she talked about. Looking at the materials and also looking at materials, not dumbing it down, still trying to somehow create that rigour so that all children are being, is this idea of support and challenge. But I know that particularly with some of the children that are coming through from COVID, it's getting more and more difficult. We've got a large number of EHCPs coming through our school and it's making our materials accessible to them, but at the same time trying to tease challenge through. But definitely I will send some stuff. It will just be, normally it would be, straight away, but as I say, it will be the week after. And I'm not actually in school at the moment. I'm not very well at the moment. I'm actually at home. So I wouldn't even be able to go in tomorrow and get the stuff, but I will, I promise you will get some stuff through. And if anyone's like to send stuff through and share it, because ultimately that's really what I would like us to start, as humanities teachers to be able to do. Holly, have you got another question or is your hand up from before? Sorry.
No, sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I do that as well. Any other ideas or questions or fears that you might have about Ofsted? I think it's what's said in here is it's fair enough that you might have some ideas or questions or not. Right, I hope. I really do hope that this has been of use. I know I've rattled through it and we've got 10 minutes spare. I wouldn't imagine that that you're too disappointed with having a few minutes early. I hope it's been of use. I will be sending through the PowerPoint and I'm sure there will be an evaluation form that's going to be sent out to you, which I really value your feedback so that I can make these better. Certainly with the PowerPoint, if you want to look at what Tim Jenner and Ian Freeland have got to say about your particular subjects, history, geography. I'm not being rude to RE. I know you're a humanities, but those history, geography are the areas that I particularly look at in my mat roll as TLP. If you'd like to get in touch about anything specific separately, please do. Again, if you don't hear back immediately from me, it's not my fault. It's because we're going through this digital transformation at Aldridge, where we're moving across everything onto Microsoft. Things are being imported, exported, OneNotes, all sorts of stuff. But the laptops are being handed in on Friday, and we won't get them back until the following week. So we'll be teaching old school next week. I hope this has been of use. I know I said earlier about my takeaways. That's okay. Adaptive teaching. It was certainly mentioned and it was certainly looked at, and it's certainly something that Emma, and I know I keep using it, but I might as well use a real person than just talk about, generalisms that Emma could talk about. And I think with the adaptive teaching, one of the things that staff get that we got confused about is this idea of we've all got to be teaching exactly the same way. We can't adapt the lessons depending on who we've got in front of us, because then someone's going to come in and I won't be doing the same as what Fred next door's doing, and that's not the case. You have that conversation at the end of the session as a staff teacher, and you can talk about, you might have noticed that I'm doing it this way. That's how we do it in our geography. That's how we do it in our history. We adapt. I understand the curriculum. I understand where we're going. I hit those points, but you would have noticed that I did it in this way. And you'll notice in the books, we've done it that way because of these students, because I do it in this way. And that was fine. I think actually it shows that you really understand the curriculum, that you've got the nous to be able to adapt. Excuse me. To adapt it. There wasn't a massive emphasis, but I think there was certainly conversations where I think my staff wanted to make sure I'm not rogue, I'm not maverick, I wasn't going out on at a different angle. If you noticed, I was still covering those areas, but I chose to do it in perhaps a different way that Emma might have talked to you about, and that was fine, because it's still showing an understanding. That's fine. No, it's a good question. I hope I answered it and didn't witter too much. Is there any other questions? I will wrap up then just by saying it is in my opinion, and I've been teaching for 25 years, so I've done all sorts of OFSTEDs. The original ones that were for a week, and there's about 20 of them, and you knew 6 months in advance, believe it or not. The previous framework and this framework, it puts an awful lot of pressure on subject leads, true, but it allows subject leads to shine, because, and I know it sounds cheesy, I've deliberately stayed in middle management, because middle management for me, it is the engine room, it is the heart of a school, and you will get to talk, and you get to, it's not even justify, it's saying this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, not in an aggressive way, but you get to talk, and you get to talk to your inspector about the brilliant aspects of your teams. You talk about the strengths, and you show that self-awareness, because that's all that OFSTEDs have always been about, is the self. Right, being able to evaluate. I know where my strengths are. We're working on this. We've got the capacity to do it. I'm well aware of it. You might even see it. As I say, I would not go down the route of talk and backing it up by data. One, they're not interested. Two, it can backfire, and your staff certainly won't want to be starting to talk about data. And if you've opened that door, who knows? But definitely, it's all about everyone singing from the same hymn sheet, and they should, because they've all shared in that hymn sheet. They've all added to it. They've all talked about which bits, that bit's dross, I don't want to do that. That's not good. Can we change that? All those conversations going on in game time. And I know that's a long way away, but it's using that time, having those organic schemes of work, and having that summary sheet. That's definitely something I would definitely have. If you want your staff to mirror what you've said in that initial meeting, have that summary sheet. Emma knew her team were going to say the same or similar points. Not parrot fashion, not because they're little robots, because they sat, they talked about those questions, they put together their answers together, they summarised it into a shorter document that's manageable the night before Ofsted are coming in, and you know you're going to be deep dived, and they could talk about it, and it wasn't a script they had to stick to per se. It was reminding them of, these are the things we want to share with the Ofsted inspector. This is a chance for us to show what we do well, what we're aware of, and what we can do, and what we're aware of we need to do better. I know there's always the horror story. I certainly didn't experience that. My team didn't experience that. That you know, the inspectors wanted to see what was working. They were open-minded, and they were aware as well of you know, they came and it was the day before year 11 were leaving. So year 11 were yippee skippy, and they were aware of that. And staff are tired, and they were aware of that. You know, I think the majority of Ofsted inspectors, they come in and they want you to do well. I genuinely think that, and it's certainly our experience. And as I say, it was so calm. It was so organised, you know, and we're not 100% there yet, and that's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying definitely the prep is worth it. Those meetings where you sit and talk about what you want to do, you know, what are we as a department? Those really finite questions. Why are we teaching it in this order? Do I have to teach why are we teaching that's there? You know, why does that fit there? Why are we doing this assessment? What are we going to do with it afterwards? All those brilliant learning and teaching and planning conversations. Thank you, Ofsted, because it's made us have those conversations, perhaps when we haven't done in the past. So I'm shutting up now. Thank you ever so much for coming along. I genuinely hope this has been of value. If you've got any questions, as I say, if you want to get in touch with me, you can get in touch with me through the Mercian website, Mercian email address. I will not be ignoring you, I promise, if it's next week. But I will get back to you soon now, so it might just be the week after. And have a lovely evening, have a lovely afternoon. And unless you've got anything else, I'll say goodbye.
Thanks, Heather.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.